Picture sitting in a California dentist's chair, waiting for a permanent prosthesis to replace half of your face. For this man, that wait has lasted 12 years and required more than 20 separate surgeries. The timeline begins over a decade ago. He was a college student attending an opera class, but the night ended far from the stage, outside a local bar. An altercation escalated rapidly. He was physically picked up and thrown face first directly into a concrete sidewalk. By the time he dragged himself back to his brother's truck, the bleeding completely soaked through the thick fabric of the seats. Surviving an impact that obliterates the human jaw is a massive medical hurdle. Next, he would have to survive the legal system's interpretation of his injuries. The immediate physical damage consisted of multiple comminuted fractures. His facial bones were shattered into loose fragments. Putting his face back together would eventually consume upwards of $700,000 in medical bills. Take a look at this clinical schematic of a reconstructed human jaw. The mechanical reality is intensely invasive. It requires weaving wires, installing metal plates, packing in surgical mesh, and harvesting pieces of skull bone to replace what the concrete destroyed. While the surgeons worked, the legal system reacted. Prosecutors looked at the victim's record. He happened to be on house arrest at the time, and explicitly refused to press criminal charges against his attackers. Authorities, defense lawyers, and judges rewrote the reality of the assault. They constructed a protective narrative for the attackers, claiming the victim had simply gotten drunk and tripped on the sidewalk. The courts effectively weaponized his past against his present survival. This creates an invisible trauma, the realization that the law does not view you as a victim worth protecting. That lack of protection followed him directly into the prison system, where he served a 2-year sentence shortly after the injury. Without teeth or proper facial structure, his tongue constantly hung out of his mouth, bleeding daily, robbing him of basic speech and human dignity. The breaking point arrived in an Alabama low-custody work camp. A piece of surgical wire holding his jaw together violently snapped and popped straight up through the bottom mesh of his gums. Despite the severity of the rupture, prison officials made him wait 4 agonizing hours just to be transported for emergency facial surgery. Following that, he spent an entire year in the system without teeth. Institutional environments naturally degrade the human body. When severe medical vulnerability collides with sheer bureaucratic apathy, the system turns neglect into a passive, sanctioned form of torture. Surviving the acute trauma required intense medication. He spent up to 9 months completely bedridden, relying on heavy prescription painkillers just to endure the physical agony of the ongoing reconstructions. This diagram illustrates the predictable trap he fell into. The process loops continuously. You endure massive surgery, require severe pain medications, go through grueling withdrawal detox, and do it all over again. He did this 20 separate times. And the physical vulnerability breeds deep psychological paranoia. Knowing that a single strike to the face could cause catastrophic, irreparable damage, he developed a fear of being hit first, forcing him into a state of extreme hypervigilance. Years later in Kansas, that hypervigilance was tested. He was sitting peacefully in a friend's car when an assailant ambushed him, and he was struck across the face with a heavy tire iron. He fled the attack to protect his reconstructed jaw. Clear video evidence proved he was running away from a weapon with his hands completely down. Yet the courts ignored the footage entirely and convicted him of battery. In this case, because the victim was already labeled a criminal, his desperate acts of survival were legally categorized as unprovoked violence. Decades of physical violence and legal battles usually end in ruin. He eventually recognized that carrying years of untreated trauma was a path that only led back to the same places. He faced 2 paths, a jagged circle leading to a cell or grave, and a line moving away from his past. Stepping off that circle required internal work. Over 8 years, he committed to coaching, journaling, breathwork, and meditation to rebuild his mental architecture. Genuine recovery is a solitary act. It requires taking radical responsibility for your own mind, abandoning the expectation that an indifferent system will ever step in to provide justice or healing. Today, he sits in that California dentist chair, managing a successful business. He has a loving marriage and strong friendships, achieved while still lacking his permanent teeth. He made a conscious, daily decision to reject his history of victimization. He refused to let the horrific events of his past dictate the parameters of his future. Now he is offering free mentorship to the absolute worst cases out there. He's actively reaching out to those who have been hogtied by abuse, crippled by addiction, and relentlessly battered by institutional systems. No matter the severity of your shattering, the pieces can be reassembled. The process of moving forward begins when you decide that enough is enough, and you prioritize getting the pain out of your life.